Welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm Phil Arno.
And I'm Kim Piazza. And all of us here at WBBZ-TV were honored to be part of the Buffalo Broadcasters Gala Dinner and Ceremony, where our owner, Phil Arno, was inducted into the 2015 class of the Buffalo Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Our own John DeShula was there as host, and he joins us along with Phil as we celebrate here at our hometown station.
Well, wow, very exciting night.
It was a great night.
Yeah, it really was. And Phil, what was it like when you got the call that you're going to be inducted into the Buffalo Broadcasters Hall of Fame?
Nerve-wracking.
Nerve-wracking. That's not the answer I expected.
I'm not used to giving speeches, I guess. I had to think about that a little bit and prepare and decide what I wanted to talk about. You know, you're limited. You get up there and you have to talk in a very short amount of time, and there's just so many people to thank, and there's so much to talk about. I mean, in such a long career, so many experiences. And the beginnings in Buffalo were so tremendous, and it was all based on Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo is such a tremendous place to learn the business of broadcasting and so many other things. I mean, the arts in general, and work habits and discipline, and something about Buffalo that just creates a work ethic and a character that carries through. I mean, when I was in Los Angeles, I met so many people who were very successful in Hollywood that were from Buffalo. And it seemed like they were everywhere. There were more people from Buffalo than, you know, just about any other market in the country that were so successful. Very, very top writers and producers and directors throughout the industry. And the only way you can account for it is that it's just such a good place to grow up.
Well, I think there's a great, and Kim, you've seen this, I'm sure, too, as you travel. There's a great camaraderie of people from Western New York. When you find out that your friend, your neighbor, your coworker is from there and you're in another place, it's natural to talk about the weather and chicken wings and things like that.
Well, and you know, I also hear when people come into Buffalo from out of town, lots of times we have people come through, some big names, some very famous folks come through, and they can't stop talking about the hospitality and the environment here in Western New York. I mean, we are the city of good neighbors. We really are that, and that's part of, I think, why you see so much success for people from Buffalo.
Yeah, and certainly in Los Angeles. And earlier this year, I had an opportunity to vacation in Los Angeles with my daughter Jade, who, by the way, operated camera for this segment. I'm very proud of her. And we caught up with one of Phil's chopper videographer pals, Vince Mack, because Phil's career, for those of you who are watching WBBZ, is not just isolated here to this television station. It's a long and storied career that includes news videography, not only here at Channels 4 and Channel 7, but also out in Los Angeles. So let's meet Phil's friend, Vince Mack.
At Van Nuys Airport, next to the helipad, and with Vince Mack, former colleague of Phil Arno's. Vince, thanks for letting us interrupt your day here at Van Nuys.
My pleasure. I'm tired of flying in the helicopters all day. We just spent an hour over a rescue up in the mountains.
So what do you do exactly when you fly?
Pray a lot and hang on for dear life if I've got a less than admirable pilot, but so far I've had really great pilots. I run the camera, the microwave, the audio, sometimes do reporting if I don't have a reporter on board.
Choppers and aircraft to cover the news is commonplace, but back when you started, it was novel and new.
We, here in LA, Channel 11, we got a helicopter in 1992, and we were the third helicopter in town. We were all competing, obviously, but back in those days, we hung out the door with a harness and a handheld camera. Channel 4 came along with this marvelous little thing called the Westcam, and that changed television helicopter news coverage dramatically, because all of a sudden your pictures, if you were doing it hanging out the door, didn't look anywhere near as good as what they were getting with this remotely controlled camera. So eventually, after a year of hanging out the door, we got our first one.
I would suspect the choppers get pretty close to each other when they're covering a major story. How do you communicate with the other stations?
Well, they're all on a common helicopter frequency, and we get quite vocal about keeping our distance from the other helicopters. I think in the 22 years I've been doing this, we've only ever had maybe two close calls. And that was usually at night because somebody wasn't talking on the radio. But by and large, these guys have really got their heads screwed on straight.
And you know, in Phil's situation, in his accident with this pilot, how did that impact you and others in your field?
It bothered me for a long time. And to see Phil go through all of that agony that he went through for 3 or 4 years was heart-wrenching, to say the least, because this was a friend of mine. I mean, his kids were a year old when it happened. And as far as the industry here in town, I think it just made us all much more aware of what can go wrong when things start falling apart. And that's eventually what happened with that helicopter. Something broke up inside. And the little pilot that we had at the time, she was overwhelmed by it. And anyway, everybody survived.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
but it just makes you very aware of your mortality.
What was Phil like, and what was your relationship with Phil here in Van Nuys?
Well, Phil came along as the afternoon relief person. I worked from 4 in the morning until 2, and then he would come on at 2 o'clock and work until 11 o'clock. And Phil was the gadget guy. Phil would show up 2 times a week with some new, Vince, you got to see this camera. You got to see, look, you got to, and he would go on, and then he would come in next week with something bigger and better.
And he's still a gadget guy, I can tell you that.
Hi from Van Nuys Airport here in Van Nuys, California. I'm Vince Mack, a friend of Phil Arno's, a fellow pilot, videographer, and a longtime associate. And I'd like to say, Phil, congratulations on your induction into the Buffalo Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
Very nice.
Yeah, well,
He's a good man.
And that crash, that helicopter crash that we saw, you were in that copter.
Yep. That was an interesting ride, that's for sure.
Wow.
Phil has a good line, which will, well, tell us the line because it's an interesting one.
Well, when they pulled me out of the helicopter, Aaron Fitzgerald, a guy that I trained for the Channel 2 helicopter, and they were taking those pictures when our helicopter was in trouble. They landed, and he came over to the helicopter and pulled me out. And the first thing I said to him was, "That was a hell of a ride." And he said, "I'll bet."
Oh my goodness.
Well, now flashing forward to Buffalo, as we talked about earlier, you decided, Phil, to bring your family back here. You could have stayed in Los Angeles.
Well, Mary and I talked about it actually well before that had happened, and we decided that once the kids were at an age where they were about to go into school, we thought that we wanted to make a decision to get away from the Los Angeles market because Buffalo was a good place to bring kids up. And Los Angeles, with the gangs and the drugs and the traffic and a lot of the things that go on out there, we didn't think it was the best place to raise a family.
Well, you'll hear that now because Kim, as we saw the other night at the WNED studios, Phil made his acceptance speech, and we thought we would share it with you, our hometown MeTV fans. Phil Arno's acceptance speech at the Buffalo Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
I'd like to thank my family, Mary, Joe, Warren, Anna, for always being there and understanding when Dad couldn't be home for dinner or vacations had to be shuffled around because of something was going on at work, and never complaining. Always just keep going and deal with it. You guys are the greatest, and I couldn't do it without you. And my family from WBBZ, you guys are the greatest, the most creative and dedicated staff in all of television in Western New York. And John DeSciullo and Chris Musial, 2 of the best TV executives, not just in Western New York, but anywhere. WBBZ would not exist without those 2. And there's a couple of tables of friends here that chose to be here to share this night with me. Friends that go all the way back to my days at Canisius High School, at least 20 years or so, right guys? Maybe a little bit longer. And hopefully Tim Russert is somewhere smiling down on us, a good friend, good classmate, and a friend of the broadcasters, and a loyal Buffalo guy. I started my career at KB and working with Fred Clustein and Jack Armstrong, Don Burns. I got to play for the KB Yo-Yo's basketball team. And I got to take Danny Nevereth and Sandy Beach. I used to get to drive them to the games along with some of the other guys. And that was a real adventure, especially when we were going to play in Canada and we had to go over the Peace Bridge. You can imagine going over the Peace Bridge and having the custom agent look into the car and see a bunch of guys from KB Radio. And most of the time, he didn't even have to ask a question. He just looked at us and would say, lane 5. And then once in a while, you thought that you could get through without a hassle. You thought, okay, he's asked all the questions. We're just about ready to get through. And then from the back seat, you would hear, could you hurry it up a little bit? I got to get home and get this into the freezer. And, you know, he would basically bend over and look into the back seat, and there would be Sandy Beach. And he'd be waving this around. Pull over, lane 5. Well, I had a sense of humor before I started working at KB, but after 3 years of working with those guys, my sense of humor got on a pogo stick and ended up somewhere on the other side of the Twilight Zone. And speaking of the Twilight Zone, I ended up in Los Angeles, and in that market, I interviewed movie stars, Bob Hope, Jimmy Stewart, guys I grew up watching all the time, my idols. I spent time on the streets of Santa Monica with homeless people. I covered the riots and the earthquakes and the white Broncos, and I had conversations with 3 presidents of the United States. And one thing that always amazed me when I was in that market was how great a market Buffalo was. And John Beard and Kevin O'Connell can testify to this. When you're in that market, a big market, the second market in the country, they looked at me and they respected me as a professional, somebody who knew the craft, a broadcaster. And it was because I started out here in Buffalo. Buffalo is such a tremendous market for professionalism in this business. A lot of the people who have never worked in another market, they don't realize sometimes what they have here in this broadcast atmosphere. I hope that isn't lost in future generations. It's just a tremendous place to be a broadcaster. Part of what I learned early on broadcasting in Buffalo was that broadcasting isn't just about how much money you can make or being a celebrity. It's about serving the community. It's about serving the people who choose to watch you. Maybe you make it a little bit easier for them to get better health care, or maybe make an investment in their retirement. Or maybe it's just as simple as helping them spend a little bit less money when they go to buy groceries, or as simple as putting a smile on their face after a hard day's work. But you make their life just a little bit better for having done your job as a broadcaster. And if this award tonight means that somewhere along the line I've done my job as a broadcaster, then no award, no honor could mean more to me than this does. So once again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you to the Buffalo Broadcasters.
Well, Phil, first of all, thank you for that shout out for Chris and I. I will say this is a total team effort at WBBZ-TV. It's not singular by any means. And so we'll give you this award again. How about that? There you go.
Oh, my goodness.
On behalf of me and WBBZ, I thank you.
Speech!
Yeah, no, we just did it. We just did it. We're done with
it. Speech. You know, in your speech that you mentioned how important it is that you are serving your community and how important it is. And, you know, I can tell you firsthand, all the conversations I've had with you, Phil, that Western New York, that is the truth. You are so invested in seeing the people in your community get the information that you know they need to make their lives better. And I think that just says the world.
And
Well, that's
so-
what it's all about.
Yep.
I mean, you know, that's why we're here, and hopefully that's what we can do.
Well, thank you, Phil. And up next, celebrating the Buffalo Music Hall of Fame.